There are people who sacrifice everything for the ones they love and never once ask for anything in return. Not recognition, not gratitude, not even acknowledgement. They simply give, completely and without condition, because that is who they are. And then there are families who take that kind of love and mistake it for weakness. This story is about what happens when those two things collide, and what is left standing when the person who was supposed to be broken refuses to stay broken. It started with a choice. The kind of choice that happens in a single terrifying second. The kind where there is no time to think, only to act. A vehicle came out of nowhere, and she threw herself between it and her family without hesitation. She did not calculate the cost. She did not weigh what she was giving up. She just moved. And the impact that should have killed someone in her family instead took 5 years of her life. 5 years spent in a coma, suspended somewhere between the living and the gone, while the world outside her kept moving without her. 5 years is a long time. Long enough for grief to transform into something else. Long enough for people to rearrange their lives around an absence and grow comfortable in the new arrangement. Long enough for loyalty to quietly expire in people who never had much of it to begin with. When she finally opened her eyes and came back to the world she had sacrificed herself to protect, she did not find what she had left behind. The family that should have been waiting, the people whose lives she had saved with her own body, had reorganized themselves around someone new. A girl, the daughter of the very driver who had caused the accident in the first place. The one whose father had fled the scene and left her lying on the road. That family, instead of being held accountable, had somehow embedded themselves into her home, into her family, into the space that had always been hers. And her family had let it happen, had welcomed it, had, over 5 years of guilt and quiet negotiation, and whatever arrangements had been made in the dark, chosen the comfort of moving on over the inconvenience of the truth. She could not accept it. Of course she could not. Anyone with a pulse and a functioning sense of justice would have reacted the same way. She refused to welcome the girl whose father had destroyed her life. She refused to smile and make peace and pretend that none of it had happened. And that refusal, that single, honest, completely reasonable refusal, was the moment her own family decided she had become a problem. What they did next was not impulsive. It was planned. A second accident, carefully constructed. Evidence arranged to point in one direction, hers. And suddenly, the person who had spent 5 years in a coma, because she had saved these people, was being presented to the world as a killer, as the one responsible for her own parents' deaths. The accusation was monstrous, and the people delivering it were the ones who shared her blood and had once shared her home. Then came the months. Her fiancé, the man who was supposed to love her, sat across from her and applied pressure. Her own sibling, someone who had grown up beside her, pushed and manipulated and twisted every conversation toward one goal: get her to confess to something she did not do. Break her down until she signed her name to a lie that would bury her forever. They believed she would crack. They had seen her soft, seen her sacrificial, seen her spend 5 years unconscious for their sake, and they had confused all of that tenderness for fragility. They did not know what 5 years of silence does to a person. They did not understand that somewhere in that long darkness, something in her had finished grieving and started deciding. They did not realize that the woman who woke up was not the same as the girl who went under. On the morning of her birthday, while they were still sharpening their next move, she made hers. Not with anger, not with revenge as the primary motive. She simply let go. Of the confession they wanted, of the family that had chosen betrayal, of the fiancé who had chosen convenience, of every chain they had spent months wrapping around her. She walked away from all of it with the quiet authority of someone who has already lost everything once and survived it. They thought they were watching her fall. They were watching her begin,